Welcome back to Introduction to Philosophy. The last time we met, we talked about the theory of knowledge. We talked about empiricism and how can we know anything. This time, and moving back a little bit to where we were talking about empiricism and idealism, we talked about Berkeley last time as well. This time, I wanted to introduce to you a tremendous thinker for the empiricist camp. Berkeley was a tremendous thinker for the idealist camp. And I wanted to give to you today David Hume, just so you kind of have one of the bigger figures on the side of idealism with Berkeley, and then on the side of empiricism with David Hume. So we're going to talk about him a little bit today. Remember that there was that tremendous battle that's been going on throughout all of history between empiricism and idealism as to where what knowledge should be founded on. Should it be founded on our senses or on our minds? Hopefully by now you've kind of gotten that, and so I don't want to reemphasize that a lot as we're going through this. Hopefully by now you've got some of the verbiage and you can just follow along as we go. Remember that we mentioned René Descartes, and Descartes came first, and then Berkeley's going to come along a little bit after and kind of overlapping each other, and they're going to strike a tremendous blow for idealism. Later on, David Hume is going to come along, and he's going to strike a tremendous blow for empiricism. So we wanted to look at a little bit of his information today, kind of seeing who he is, why he was influential, and what his basic thoughts were. And then we're starting to transition from what is our knowledge founded on. Hopefully, once we get an understanding of what our knowledge is founded on, then we can start to begin to ask the question about morality. But you have to start with that foundation of knowledge. You can't jump off into ethics until you have an idea of what thinking should be founded on. But today, talking about David Hume, and with him, again, he is an empiricist, which means that, of course, then all knowledge is going to come to us through the five senses. David Hume is going to set out to counter some of Descartes' ideas. He, like Descartes, does start his journey looking for some kind of truth, like Descartes is looking for that truth. And then remember, Descartes found a truth that I think, therefore I am. So he found something that he thought was going to be foundational, something that was going to be truthful. Hume is going to start off on that same kind of quest, but as we'll see, Hume ultimately becomes a skeptic, and he's known as one of the great skeptics in philosophy, so that he's not going to latch on to that kind of truth that Descartes is, but instead he's going to rely on his five senses, and that's why he ends up in this empiricist camp. David Hume's dates are 1711 to 1776, and you should recognize the 1776 date. That is the year of the birth of America, and that's the year that David Hume dies. He is going to be the most influential writer in philosophy who wrote in English. And there's other influential writers who are going to write in other languages, but up until this point, into that time, he's going to be the most influential who writes in English. Now, he is English. He is from the Isles of Britain, and he's going to be writing during a time that is called the Scottish Enlightenment. Now, the Scottish Enlightenment was a time in history when Edinburgh, which is the capital of Scotland, becomes the learning capital of the world. It's going to be the one, it's going to be called sometimes the Athens of the North. And think about that for a moment. Athens is the birthplace of philosophy. It's the birthplace where men begin to love wisdom, and they begin to go out and search for truth and for answers. And for Edinburgh to be called the Athens of the North is a tremendous compliment. It's very descriptive. What that means is that it's so influential that it's almost like Athens is reborn here in the 1700s with the scholarship and with the tremendous amount of learning that's going to be happening there in Scotland. Hume wrote in times when art, medicine, and thought were advancing tremendously. Hume is initially going to study law, but as his family thinks he is studying law, in fact, he's sneaking around and he's studying philosophy. So he's off to college, and like so many college kids do, he rebels. His parents think that he's doing one thing, and in fact, he's doing another thing. And perhaps, many college students' parents wish that they were sneaking around studying philosophy instead of sneaking around doing the things that they are doing. But that was what Hume was doing. Instead of sneaking around partying, he was sneaking around studying philosophy. He became financially stable through publishing a work on a history of England that was 5 volumes, and at that time, if you could publish that kind of work, then it would set you up financially, as it did with Hume, because books were so rare, and to collect and have all the information in one place was so rare at that time that if you could actually start that endeavor and complete it, then it would be financially highly beneficial. We'll see the same thing happen with John Stuart Mill's father, where he'll set himself up financially because he'll pull together a great work on India in this case. But if you could do that, if you could put together those kinds of writings, then it would set you up financially. We kind of take the information and the collection of information that we have so readily available today, we seem to take that for granted a lot. And this being in a time when books were highly, highly valuable, and to have 20 or 30 books was to be very, very wealthy. And I don't know how many 100 books on the shelves of my house. And so that would have been extremely, extremely rare. So he sets himself up financially by publishing this work. He is going to spend time in the salons of England and in Paris. Now again, he is British, so obviously he's going to spend time in England, but he'll travel to Paris twice in his lifetime. The first time he was there, he was basically unknown. He was an attaché attached to a diplomat. But the second time he was there, he would have rock star status. Everybody would have known who he was, and they all would have been trying to get time with him, because to have that conversation with Hume was a tremendous experience. And so if you can imagine sitting down, let's say, and being able to talk to or listen to rock stars as perhaps they talk to each other or play with each other, I mean, they're trying to get time with Hume like people today might try to get time with rock stars in the privacy of where he's hanging out. Now, to be fair, I said he spent time in the salons, which in this case, obviously, there's also going to be women there. Now, it is the opportunity for men to come together and have intense and deep discussions, but certainly there's also going to be a little bit of fraternizing that's going to happen there as well. And it was even said of Hume that his ability to have discussion was so great, even with the women, that several of the women were overheard saying of Hume, and the word became flesh. And so with Hume, the idea here is that, and the word became flesh is something that is talked about with Jesus in the New Testament, in that the word came down from heaven and became flesh and dwelt among us. So the idea here is that God descended, and now God is here with us in the form of Jesus. And so when they said that about Hume, what they're saying is that so divine is his ability to have conversation and to engage in other activities, that the women in Paris began to say of him that he's godlike. Now, having said that, let me also then kind of back up and add the fact that Hume was a good man. He was good in a number of ways. He was generous. He was certainly big-hearted. We can see him taking care of another philosopher by the name of Rousseau, and Rousseau went through any number of depressions, and Hume is going to actually even invite him into his house and house him for a time as well. And so what we see here is a man who is a good spirit, who is tremendously giving, and as we look at Hume on his deathbed, rather than Hume being comforted by others, he in fact comforts other people rather than them comforting him. And so we see a tremendous figure in Hume who was much loved. He is noble, and he is big-hearted, and I think a tremendous force of good for the name of philosopher. Now, kind of jumping into Hume and his thinking, remember he's an empiricist, and so for him, if you can't trust your senses, what is it that you can trust? And if you know anything about the British, they seem to be a little bit more straightforward and to the point than, say, the French, who seem to kind of be a little bit more frilly even in their way of presenting ideas. Hume wants to cut straight to the chase, and he wants to avoid complex dialogues. Now, those kinds of complex dialogues, there's something that were kind of part of philosophy for quite some time. He's going to start trying to just approach things kind of quickly and simply, and we'll see another figure do this as well later on named William James. But he is going to try to cut through this, and he wants to get down to the nitty-gritty rather quickly, which is quite British of him. And so for him, he wants to get rid of those complex dialogues. He's concerned with things that are empirical, things we can know with our five senses. He's also concerned with logic and common sense. He is going to influence John Locke's thinking, and he's going to have this idea of that there's nothing in the mind that's not first in the senses. And if you don't remember that, go back and watch the empiricism versus idealism debate, the empiricism versus idealism lecture, and there's that idea of there's nothing that in the mind that's not first in the senses. Remember the computer, and we talked about how it has to come from the five senses into the computer first, right? We're back to that kind of discussion, but I'm not going to repeat all that here. And so with John Locke and with David Hume, the idea is that there's nothing in the mind that's not first in the senses. And then remember us talking about how we learned everything, and I told you about the ABCs, and you learn ABCs simple, and then it becomes ever more and more complex. Hume is going to adopt that kind of thinking. He's going to add a little bit more to it, as we'll see, but he's going to adopt that kind of thinking. So we started off simple, things got more complicated, but those simple things are the foundation. The foundation is the five senses. They learn the simple things, we progress to ever more complicated things. Okay, he is going to talk about cause and effect. The idea here being that how do we learn? How do we know? How do we come to gain knowledge? We come to gain these things by recognizing and understanding cause and effect. And so some of the challengers of Hume asked him things like, how do we know that all grass is green? Or how do you know that the sun is going to rise tomorrow? How can you know these things if you haven't seen them with your senses? And so with grass and all grass being green, what they're saying here is that in order to make the claim that all grass is green, you would have to have seen all grass, or at least you'd have to have seen all green grass, because we do know that there are some grasses that aren't green. But for now, setting that aside and just saying, imagine that all grass is green. How could you possibly know that all grass is green? Hume could only know all grass is green if he has in fact seen all grass, according to his theory. At least that's what the critics are going to be saying. According to his theory, he would have to have seen all grass in order to know that all grass is green. He has not seen all grass. No one has. You can't. That would be totally impossible. Start your journey today. That's fine, but guess what's going to happen by the time you get back around the world? Other grass is going to have come up, and you're just going to spend your life trying to look at all grass, and that would be totally impossible. So how could then Hume say we know that grass is green when he hasn't seen all grass? According to his own empiricist position, he can't make the claim that all grass is green until he has in fact seen all grass. Or how do you know that the sun will rise tomorrow? And the idea here is that you can't know that until you see it. And with Hume, he's going to have to answer those kinds of questions, with grass being green and the sun rising tomorrow. Now, Hume is going to say, in response to this idea of how can you know that all grass is green, he's going to say that you can know all grass is green because the stuff that makes up grass is green. And so since you've seen the stuff of this grass over here, you can know that the stuff in this grass over here is also going to be, in fact, green. And therefore, since you've seen this stuff of grass, you can know the stuff of all grass. Or how do you know that the sun will rise tomorrow? And this one's going to be even more important for us. He's going to say that, well, we have this understanding of cause and effect, and we have this understanding of connection, and we have the understanding of relationship. And since we know that the sun has always risen, then we know that there is a causal relationship within that aspect of the sun rising, and we'll always know that it does that because there's the cause-effect relationship. Now, the cause-effect relationship is going to be really, really important for Hume, because he's going to say that's how we learn. We learn by understanding cause and effect. What that means is that with our senses, we see event A followed by event B. And we see this pattern, we see the pattern happen often enough that we become to understand that when A happens, B follows. Now, we learned that when A happens, B follows by doing what? We're just going to stick with sight. By seeing it. So we used our five senses and we acquired a bit of knowledge. We acquired the fact of that when event A happens, event B follows. And so the same thing can be concluded here with the sun rising, in the sense of that we understand that given these circumstances, then the sun is going to rise, because that's how we learn. We learn through cause and effect. We see event A followed by event B, and we begin to understand ... Remember somebody sticking something in your mouth, you learn suck on it, the pain goes away, and so you learn that, hey, when I have this pain down here in my stomach, then I cry, event A happens, I cry. B, somebody sticks something in there. C, I suck on it. D, that goes away. And that's how you learned everything according to Hume. This is going to become called Hume's parade theory, in the sense of that if you've ever watched a parade, you see float A followed by float B, followed by float C, followed by float D. And so the idea here is that there's this kind of ongoing parade of sensation that we witness with our five senses, and that's how we learn everything. We watch this parade of experiences with our five senses as it passes us by. And so he says we see event A followed by event B, and then he makes this statement. He says, so that anything could be the cause of anything. And it almost seems to be kind of a one-off in Hume. It's almost like he makes this point, and then he says, well, anything could be the cause of anything, and then he moves on. And that was... it caused a firestorm amongst a lot of his critics, because he didn't really explain what he meant. He just said it, and then he kind of moved on. And so in a way, it kind of doesn't make sense, because event A followed by event B, so anything could be the cause of anything. Well, if anything could be the cause of anything, then the blackboard here could have been caused by a herd of elephants, because anything could be the cause of anything. And so his critics really took him to task on that. But he wasn't saying really that anything could be the cause of anything. What he was trying to say is that ultimately there are causes of things, and we'll witness things like this, like A and B, but ultimately knowing the cause of something is going to be difficult or even impossible when it comes to fully understanding completely and totally the causes of what is happening in front of us. Now, this is why he's the great skeptic, right? Because he's skeptical of this idea of it, and that we can know exactly what causes it. We see this thing happen, and we see this happen after it, but there's something that happens here in between that we can't necessarily fully understand. So, for example, then, imagine for a moment that you're at a baseball game, and imagine that your senses work in such a way that your sight is only on the air for 1 second, it goes off for 3 seconds, and then it comes back on, right? So you can see for a second, you can't see for 3 seconds, you can see again, in a second, for a second, and then your sight goes off and you can't see for 3 seconds, and then your sight comes back on and you can see for a second. Imagine that your senses operate in that way, and then imagine that you're watching a baseball game. And so what you're seeing at the moment, because your sight's on the air, is you see the pitcher wind up. Now your sight goes off the air, say for 3 seconds, and then when it comes back on the air for 1 second, you see 9 people on the field running around. According to your senses, what caused the 9 people to run around, right? You saw event A, which was what? The pitcher winding up. And then you saw event B, which was what? 9 people running around. You didn't see what happened in the middle because your sight was off the air. What would you conclude? You would conclude that when the pitcher winds up, 9 people are made to run around. The pitcher winding up would appear to be the cause of 9 people running around. Now, if you've ever been to a baseball game, you know that what causes those people to begin running around on the field is that the batter actually hit the ball. But if your senses aren't equipped in such a way as to see all causes, then you can't know, say, for example, in this case, batter hit the ball, right? Now, that's kind of a crude example of trying to get you to a place where you should understand that what Hume is saying is that we can't see all causes. We can't see all causation. That's why anything could be the cause of anything, is because we're limited in our 5 senses. We don't see everything that happens around us. And in a sense, we can't really know ultimately all causes. So anything could be the cause of anything, meaning that we're limited. Our 5 senses are going to be limited in what they can, in fact, witness for us. And so we're not quite done with this, so don't think I've finished. We're going to come back to it, but I want to continue on with a little bit of Hume's thinking, and then we'll we'll kind of see a little bit more of it develop. So we don't see all sensations. There are some things that we can't witness using our five senses. That's why we can be mistaken about what caused this, what caused event B in this case. Hume is also going to use the example of a billiard table, right? And the idea of that there is ball A that moves and hits balls B. That moves and hits ball B. And what Hume wants to make the point of, or what he's trying to get us to see, the thing that he knows is that we don't see cause on this billiard table. We see because. We see that billiard ball A moved, and because it moved and came into the same space as billiard ball B moved. And so it moved because billiard ball A hit it. But cause itself is nothing that you can witness with your five senses. Think about it for just a moment. If you try to chop off a slab of cause and fry it in a pan, you become very aware suddenly that you can't do that. Now there is no cause on this billiard table. We might say the idea is because it hits A hits B, it moves, but cause itself is nothing that we witness with the five senses. And so Hume knows this, and he says, what happens? What is it that happens? What happens is that your brain infers. That is to say, he's going to say that your brain supplies cause. Your five senses can't witness cause, therefore your brain supplies it when it's necessary. It's necessary in order for us to survive and thrive and go. And so it can't be witnessed with the five senses, but the brain is going to supply it. Now, your brain actually does this quite a bit, and it's really, really good at it too, just by the way. And so kind of a little party trick that I like to give to my students to try to help them understand that your brain does a lot of this cause. It does a lot of this inferring. It gives you something in there that you need. It supplies something that you need that you don't have through your five senses, but it's something that you need in order to thrive, right? And so kind of a quick party trick example here. Take out a piece of paper and fold it long ways, meaning not top to bottom, but side to side. So fold your paper long ways. Put two dots on it, about 6 inches apart. And you can pause the video if you want to do this. It's really pretty cool, and it works for about 75 to 80% people, depending on the anatomy of your eye. It might not quite work for you. You might have to adjust it a little bit. But if you take this piece of paper with the two dots 6 inches apart, and you cover your left eye and you hold it out with your right hand, stare at the right dot, like fixate your eyes on the right dot, and then draw it back. And when you get about halfway, tell me what happens to the left dot, right? And so for about 75 to 80% of you, when you cover this, make sure you're focused on that right dot, pull it back. When you get it about halfway, the left dot's actually going to disappear and you won't be able to see it, right? So it's really kind of weird. Like I say, it's kind of a neat party trick, but cover that eye, pull it back, you can't see it. Now, since you're staring at the right dot, draw a grid around the left dot. So what I do is 3 on top, 3 on bottom, 3 on the left, 3 on the right. And it gives you a pattern around this left dot. And then do the same thing. Cover your left eye, hold it out, draw it back. When you get about halfway, what's really, really interesting here is that, and stare at the right dot, tell me what happens to the left dot. As you pull it back, what will happen is that the left dot over here, the dot will still disappear, but you'll be able to see the grid around the dot. So why is it that you can see the grid, but you can't see the dot? That doesn't make sense. It doesn't make any sense that you could be able to see something right here, but you can't see that one piece. What happens is that you, on your eye, this is the pupil of your eye right here in the middle. These little squiggly things are blood veins. And then that other big dot I just drew up here, that's a bundle of nerves that sits in your eye. And what'll happen is that as you're seeing, as light comes through the lenses of your eyes, and it goes back to the part of your brain that is the optical portion of your brain, goes to the back of your brain. As the light comes through, a lot of the light's actually blocked by blood vessels, and then also by the bundle of nerves there that I drew as well. So that as you're walking around in the world, what you should see is this kind of blood vessel-y, veiny, and then there should be a blind spot where that bundle of nerves blocks the light that's coming in as well. But instead of doing that, your brain realizes, it recognizes that it doesn't need to know about the blood vessels and the blind spot there. And so your brain will actually infer the world around you. It will tell the optic part of your brain, hey, don't see the blood vessels, don't see the nerve bundle there, ignore that, and the brain infers the rest of your surroundings. You have the blind spot. It's just that if there's a pattern, your brain can fill in the pattern. Now, if there's no pattern, your brain can't fill it in. That's why when there wasn't the brackets around the dot, you couldn't see the dot because there was no pattern. A single dot is not a pattern. And so you couldn't see it. But when you put the brackets around it, your brain infers it, and it puts it into your mind. And so your brain does this all the time as you're walking down the sidewalk. You're not seeing blood vessels, you're not seeing the bundle of nerves. What you're seeing is just a smooth picture of the world around you. If you've ever gotten contact lenses, I remember when I first got contact lenses, I could see the lenses on the sides of my eyes. And then after a while, my brain realized he doesn't need that. In fact, it irritates him. It became very, very irritable. And so eventually my brain just stopped seeing it. And my contacts still sit in the same place. It's just that my brain said he doesn't need that. And so it stopped doing it. And in fact, they've done studies where they'll take glasses that invert the world. So you wear glasses and everything appears to be upside right. And so your glasses flip it over. And so now the world appears to be upside down, and people will walk around, and after a day or two, their brain says, something's wrong here. They'll flip it back over, and it's upside right, even though the glasses have flipped it for them. And then what they do is they take the glasses off, and the world flips back upside down because they took the glasses off, and after a day or two, the world flips it back over right side up. So your brain, and its ability to infer and kind of function and give to you a good, necessary picture of the world around you, one that you can survive and thrive in. It's really good at that kind of inference. Now, I've given you information that they didn't understand in Hume's day, but I think it's a really good, helpful a way of understanding what Hume is talking about here when he says that your brain infers this. It gives it to you. You can't see it or experience cause with your five senses, not directly. You can see the billiard balls hit each other, but that's not cause itself. You can't see cause via the five senses, but your brain infers it. It gives it to you because it's a necessary part of being able to survive and thrive in the physical world. All right. So Hume says, with this parade theory, with this idea of event A followed by event B, and we associate those things together, it's called an association theory of mind, or it is called Hume's parade theory, and they're really the same thing. So we associate A with B, or we see the parade that I talked about earlier. And Hume said, that's how we learn everything. We learn everything through this kind of sensual, five senses experience, and then we begin to learn and understand what follows based on those things. Hume says we learned everything that way. Now, everything, and in this case, that's going to include ethics. And remember, we're kind of heading toward ethics. We have, I think, two more lectures, and then we're going to be starting the introduction to ethics. But when we turn to Immanuel Kant in the next lecture, we're certainly going to be talking about ethics. And as we turn to William James, we're going to be talking about ethics as well. But kind of moving slightly towards that as well. Still want you to kind of be bringing this along, but you should understand that pretty quickly now because you should understand empiricism and then moving kind of toward ethics. So how is it that Hume is going to argue that we learn morality? How is it that we're going to begin to learn ethics? Imagine that you walk into the room, wherever you're at, or outside. You might be sitting outside. Imagine that wherever you are, you walked into the space that you're now occupying, and there you saw a dead body, a human body, that had been brutally beaten and stripped and was lying in a pool of its own blood, right? It's a little graphic, but imagine that that's the experience that you're having at this moment, and that body is freshly dead, okay? There are any number of sights and sounds that are going to be coming from that body that are going to be bombarding your senses. Your sight, your sound, your sense of smell might also be bombarded. What Hume says is that if you have those type of experiences, that they're highly unpleasant to the five senses, and you begin to associate them with the idea of, and this is bad, and this shouldn't happen. And so what is morality? It is something that sets off your five senses in such a way that it is deeply unpleasant, and it affects them so that you begin to understand this is bad, this is wrong. I sometimes refer to Hume as the guts guy, and that's not quite fair, it's not quite right, but I think it is picturesque in the sense of that it sticks in the student's mind, in that how your five senses affect your biology, how they affect yourself, not in the sense of just do they make you want to throw up. That's not what I mean, it's not what Hume means. How do they play out on the five senses? If you can smell the victim's blood, that's going to be an unpleasant experience, and so that's going to play out in the brain as, and this shouldn't happen, and it's going to be bad. And that is bad. And as it turns out, as Hume is going to argue, he's going to say that though that sensation, those types of sensations, are particular or are peculiar to creatures who have our biology. That is to say, a creature with our biology will have that experience of, and these things ought not happen, but a creature without our biology will not have those experiences. So imagine then that we've got our victim here in the pool of blood, and we bring in a goose, and the goose walks up to the victim and examines it with its eyes, hears it, smells it, all the things that we did, and has no moral response to that. In fact, the goose would probably just wander off and begin to do, whatever its goose instincts are driving it to do at that moment. Whereas the human walks in and has an overwhelming sensation of moral experience. And so what Hume is going to say is that morality comes from an excitement of the senses where it brings to us a type of negative response that we understand where it should not happen. And we talk about this idea of it excites the senses. It's more than just that it causes the senses to have some type of experience that is going to affect them for a short time and then is going to go away. It's something much, much more exciting that is that brings to them a type of experience that is it's going to be remembered. It's going to be something that you're not easily going to lose. It's not something that's quickly going to go away. And so what I do in my classroom is I'll choose a student. And I'll talk about this exciting of the senses, and then I'll prepare them, right? And then I'll throw my marker to them, not at them, although that would excite the senses even more. If I didn't prepare them and then I hurled the marker at them, they would be very excited. Their senses would be very excited. But instead, what I'll do is I'll prepare them, and then I'll toss them the marker, and then they'll toss it back to me. And what I talk to them about is that that's a sensation that they will not soon forget. It is one that they'll always remember. They might not remember anything else about my class, but they'll remember the fact that we played catch with a marker, right? Because it excites the senses. And so that's what Hume means when he talks about something exciting the senses. It's not a normal mundane, everyday walking around experience, but it's something that causes you it's something that's unusual, extraordinary that you remember. And so we know that things are right or wrong based on the fact of how they play out on our physiological, on our anatomy, on our biology. And all humans, he says, are fitted out with this. Now, immediately, I can imagine students then beginning to object, because I have students now object. They say all All humans are fitted out with this. What's really interesting is that Hume is going to know about Captain Cook's voyages, for example. And Cook is this individual who sailed around and visited multiple other harbors, multiple other civilizations, and one of the ones that comes to mind is going to be something like an islander nation. He's going to sail to some of the islands, and he's going to see the different cultures, and he's going to understand. Cook is going to bring back stories about how these individuals behave as opposed to how the Europeans are going to behave, how they're going to dress as opposed to how the Europeans are going to dress. And so kind of the easiest example is that, Hume might travel to the islands where the women go topless and then come back with stories talking about women walking around in public with no top on, and that's something that would be unthinkable in that time in Europe, but that is perfectly normal and acceptable in those islands. And so Cook certainly would have brought back these stories, but Hume would have known of these stories. And so what Hume is saying here is, when he says that we're all fitted out with this, he's not saying that we're all fitted out and we have exactly the same morality. What he means is that we're all fitted out with this, and we have morality. We have an understanding of ought and ought not, that these things should or should not happen. We all have a sense of, and these things are proper and right and good. We may not share exactly the same rules for and proper, right, and good, but we all have morality. We all have proper, right, and good. And it comes to us with our biology. It comes to us just through our anatomy. Now, what's interesting here is that, well, again, that Hume's going to say we all, for example, have the tendency to be benevolent, that's all something that we share. That we all, I'm going to say, we have the tendency to be to preserve ourselves, but also to preserve even our families. That's going to be something that we have. It's going to be a very naturalistic approach to morality. That morality doesn't come to us from any kind of God or any form of government or any form of human society or anything else. It's as much part of our nature as our hair and our fingernails. It's as much a part of our nature and our biology as every other aspect of our nature and biology. So it's a very naturalistic approach to where morality comes from. Now, you can hear, if you've studied science or if you've delved at all into Darwinism, you can hear Darwinism in what I'm saying here. This is a naturalistic approach to, it's a biological approach to ethics. It all comes from, right? Hume predates Darwin. So Darwinism was not around because Darwin hadn't written what we today call classical Darwinism, right? Darwin didn't invent Darwinism in a vacuum. It's not like he went out and, said, and I'm going to create this thing and call it evolution, and right. He was influenced by other writers as well. And so as you read Darwin, you can hear Hume being echoed in Darwin. And so in some of these writings, some of these more naturalistic writings like Hume's, we begin to see the foundations for evolution and Darwinism being laid. But with Hume here, things are natural. So think Darwin, but this is pre-Darwin, but Hume is giving Darwin some of his ideas here. All right. So we are fitted out with this type of morality. We're also fitted out with things to ensure our survival. And Hume is going to say that we should often be ruled by our passions and not necessarily ruled by our logic. And if you remember a few lectures ago, I talked about how passion should rule you. Sometimes it should rule you in the sense of, if you see that stripy, growly thing over there in the jungle, what should you do? Well, you shouldn't sit down and be logical. You should run. And in fact, we are fitted out by our nature to do what? Well, we're fitted out to flee from danger so that we can continue to pass on our genes and survive and thrive. And, according to Hume, we are also fitted out to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. And so what we do within this idea and the schematic of survival is, as we're searching to survive, that maximization of pleasure and the minimization of pain, the idea here is that all of that's natural. It comes from our biology. And that's why I say that Hume is the guts guy, right? Now, that again, it's not coming from your guts. but it does come from your naturalistic, biological, ... So you learn everything based on what? Based on your natural biological functionings, your five senses. And that includes morality and ethics in the sense of that also comes to you through your biology. Okay, that's going to be David Hume. In the next lecture, we're going to turn around and look back at Immanuel Kant.